All right. So, how mindset impacts your matches. First, number one rule that I'm going to ask of you. In order to participate in this class, we're going to require something very important. We're going to require a spirit of radical self-honesty, which means you guys will probably need to start confronting some very uncomfortable truths about yourself. And that is very, very, very critical for this. So, what's very important is that we're going to be talking about how your mindset impacts your spirit. So if you were here yesterday, this will be very, very, very relevant. Yesterday, we covered movement, where I talked about movement patterns on when to backdash, when to IED back, things like that. That's going to be very, very important. So what exactly did I mean when I say that this was going to be relevant for this particular class? What I meant when I said that this was going to be relevant for this particular class is this. It doesn't matter what you do. It doesn't matter if you backdash. It doesn't matter if you IED. It doesn't matter what you do. Press 1 if you've practiced things that I've taught you, you feel like you've practiced diligently, but you feel like you can never get it to work the way I demonstrated it or the way other stronger students have demonstrated it. Press 1 if you feel that either the technique that we've taught is insufficient or your ability to do that technique is insufficient. Let's press 1. I want to see some ones in the chat if you guys are really struggling with that possibility. 1. Okay, that's a very good answer. Saber, thank you for being brave enough to share that with us. I appreciate it. Radical self-honesty. I like it. Do I have anybody else? Does anybody want to admit if you've tried what you learned in WTG, but you're having a hard time applying it, or you're having a hard time really feeling if it works or not because you don't think that you're doing it correctly? Another radical self-honesty person. Let's go, Fuzzy. Do you guys want to get into specifics on the things that you feel like you're just not applying correctly? I love the self-honesty. Dimensional, where's your one? Do you apply everything that we do here perfectly accurately? It feels like I never have the time to do a lot of neutral techniques. Ooh, I like that, Fuzzy. I'm gonna bookmark that and we're gonna come back to that. Does anybody else wanna share really quickly? Forgot about too many movement options mid-matches. Then this is gonna be the class for you. So here's why you guys haven't been able to properly apply it. Get ready for this. All of the movement techniques that I have talked about so far don't actually matter. Not because they don't work, and not because they're not practical, but the reason why they don't matter is because even though I'm teaching you what to do, I'm not teaching you why or how to properly do it. Because I'm missing a very important ingredient, which in my opinion is the big problem that's missing in content creation for DBFZ. We often talk a lot about what to do, what kind of tech to lab, what new technique and what new skill we can apply immediately, but we don't often talk about the most important ingredient of that. We talk about these situations very clinically. We talk about them very clinically. We talk about them very... Basically, we talk about them removed from the most important aspect. You. In order to have proper strategy, in order to use mature strategy against our opponents, which is essentially what movement and neutral is, you need to have a very strong inner constitution, meaning you need to have a goal, you need to have an understanding of your opponent, and most importantly, you need to have an understanding of yourself. I'm going to give you a quote that has been in my ears all day as I listened to the Book of Five Rings on Spotify in order to prepare for this class. Immature strategy is the cause of grief. I'm going to repeat that again. Immature strategy is the cause of grief. Immature strategy is the cause of grief. What do we mean by immature strategy? It doesn't matter if you backdash all the way over here, because if you're just doing this all day, your opponent can easily just take their space. If you're backdashing here, it doesn't matter if you're backdashing safely, because your opponent can counter it. Your opponent can read you. They can understand what you are doing. And if their strategy is able to capitalize on your hesitation, on your improper mindset, which is at the core of all strategy, it doesn't matter what you do, you're always going to lose neutral. There's nothing you can do to prevent it. Even if you move flawlessly, even if you input everything correctly, you have your moon jumps down pat, you don't miss input, you are doing everything the way you were supposed to do, it doesn't matter. Because ultimately, what all strategy comes down to is a series of, this is pretty much what all fighting and all art comes down to. We're not even talking about DBFZ anymore. We're talking about conflict. We're not even talking about conflict. We're talking about art. We're talking about the very essence of humanity here, which is very simple. It is making a decision. When you choose what color to lay down on a canvas for a painting, that is a decision. When you choose what ingredients or even what dish you want to make, that is a decision. When you choose what instrument you want to play and what song you want to learn, that is a decision. And what movement patterns you choose to use in this game are a decision. And all of these decisions are heavily impacted by our mood. And unfortunately, the thing that sets conflict apart from the others is that timing. Actually, it doesn't even set it apart. Timing is incredibly important. Refer to the last masterclass that we did when I talked about timing. Timing is the single most important element in all of fighting. It is the most important element in all life. It is all about timing. If you can understand timing, and you can understand your timing, you can understand anything. A lot of people wonder, when I used to do ring match evaluations, how are you able to determine what I'm feeling? How are you able to see what I don't feel that stress. Oh, but your play is stress. Oh yeah, how can you tell? The answer is very simple. Your timing. You're making decisions too quickly. You're making decisions before you can even properly think, and you have given me something to target. And if you are unable to change your strategy, that is usually a sign that you're frustrated. Because frustration, an elevated spirit like that, is very weak. And we will discuss that in a little bit. So, we're going to take a break from this, and we're going to define strategy in this context. There's another great quote from Miyamoto Musashi, which is, strategy just means the way of doing things, and everything has a way. You have the way of the carpenter, you have the way of the salesman, the way of the photographer, the way of the barista, the way of the chef, and the way of a Dragon Ball FighterZ player, the way of a fighter. These are very important concepts because, in my opinion, and in Miyamoto Musashi's opinion, if you want to learn the way of fighting, he says you must learn the way broadly so that you see it in all things. And I 100% believe this. If you want to learn 10,000 things, you learn one thing well. If you want to learn one thing well, learn 10,000 things. A lot of the ideas that I have presented for you in our tenure in WTG have come from other fighting games. Indeed, some of them have come from beyond fighting games. We have used chess terminology before. We have even used Elden Ring, a completely different style of game, in order to express very basic concepts, because these concepts describe nature. The way of fighting is in part influenced by the way of nature. There are natural laws, according to Miyamoto Musashi. If you study physics, you understand what those laws are, which is very, very important. You cannot magically swing faster than your arm is technically capable of swinging. And even if you could, the amount of energy that you're capable of generating is going to be very limited just with your body. It can vary from person to person, but there is a limit. You cannot teleport. You can only move as fast as your legs will carry you, which is dictated by your weight. These are basically the system mechanics of existence, the system mechanics of real life fighting. And these system mechanics are basically imposed on us by developers, and they can change with a patch. This is why when you learn to listen to an opponent, you need to learn game language. What that really means is you need to learn the way of Dragon Ball FighterZ. You need to learn what is possible, how much time everything takes, and once you understand that, you can begin formulating your strategies. I'm going to give you a very, very, very hard lesson with this. A majority of your losses. What if I told you that a majority of your losses don't come because you suck? How would you feel if I told you that a majority of your losses actually probably came from players that are, for the most part, not as good or as sharp or as effective as you are? Now, that might sound like I'm making excuses for you, but no, I'm not trying to make excuses for your losses. I'm trying to properly explain their causes, because another round of radical self-honesty. Press 1 in the chat if you always feel like you lose no matter how much you improve. Like every time your defense gets better, your movement gets better, blah, blah, blah. You start feeling yourself, you go in a bracket or you fight a strong opponent and you realize or you feel like you haven't completely changed at all. Like you haven't transformed, you haven't improved, you just block 6M now, but you still lose. Press 1 if that's you. Why does it feel like you don't improve? Why does it feel like no matter how much you train, you just can't seem to hack it? No matter how much better you get, you just can't seem to beat your opponent. The reason for this is actually quite simple. A majority of your losses don't actually come from your improper play. They don't come from your inability to do something. They can come from your misinputs. They can come from mistakes, don't get me wrong, but at a certain level, you're going to weed those out. See, if you get hit by 6M all the time, and that's why you ended up losing a match, you didn't really lose because you didn't block 6M. Because if you block 6M, your opponent would have other strategies to open you up and target you. There is a problem here with your strategy. If you're thinking, oh, I need to improve my defense, then you're not thinking broadly enough. You're thinking too narrowly. Because you don't need good defense if you have good neutral. Because if you always win neutral, when exactly will you be blocking? If your pressure is exceptional, you would be able to open people up. You won't really have much time for blocking. Now, I'm not saying that you don't need to learn how to block. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that you're thinking too broadly, or you're not thinking broadly enough, rather. If you're thinking, oh man, if I could just block 6M, I would win. That's not the case. Because you're still losing neutral. A majority of your losses come from your miscalculations in strategy. That seems like a no-brainer. But your strategy is going to be heavily impacted by what your spirit is feeling. What do I mean by spirit? I'm borrowing Musashi's term, but if we were to kind of like modernize it, your mentality, the mentality with which you bring into a fight. What do I mean by mentality? If you come in cocky, arrogant, I'm the hot shit, you're going to get clapped. You're going to get humbled sooner or later. And when you do, the reason why we often say that arrogance is weak is not because you can't back up your arrogance. It's because that is not true confidence. You might be wondering, what's the difference between confidence and being cocky? If you lose while you're cocky, you will either go into denial or you will shatter, and you will have your self-perception shattered of you. And that self-perception will not survive the loss because you have defined yourself by avoiding it. If you go, oh, I'm hot shit, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'll beat your ass. I'm a money match you, blah, blah, blah. $500 right here. And you get clapped. There is nothing more humbling than that. Especially if you were talking mad shit. Why? Because your spirit was weak. Confidence comes from a strong spirit. It comes from a calm, focused mentality. It comes from discipline. It comes from assurance and certainty. And most importantly, it comes from an acute sense of self-belief. Not belief that you're better than others, but belief that you can overcome others. Belief that if you trust the process, you will succeed. That is incredibly difficult to do if you have not already tasted success. It is very difficult to test. Very difficult. Very, very, very difficult to believe that you can do something if you're not good at anything else. If Dragon Ball is the first thing, and let's be real, there's a lot of people here that come to me that are like this. Dragon Ball may be the first thing that you have ever put genuine effort into improving at. Maybe you were the kind of person who went through school and then you went into a really nice job, but this is the first time you've ever actually tried to overcome people. Maybe this is the first time you've competed. Maybe this is the first time where you have been challenged in the face of relentless self-improvement. And if you've never done it before, the first time is always the most difficult. But everything is difficult at first. And that's another quote from Miyamoto Musashi. If you go in with an incorrect mentality, it will bleed into every aspect of your play. It will bleed into your combos. It will bleed into your timing. It will bleed into your neutral decisions. It will actively sabotage you. It will poison you. You will try to go for an air-to-air without realizing that they called Vegito, because you were not paying attention to the assist, because you were too preoccupied with hitting them. You were too preoccupied with hitting them because you were either frustrated or afraid of them. You're going to be so preoccupied thinking that you're going to take every opening without realizing that your opponent has threaded the needle, and now you have essentially 2M'd yourself into a blunder. And now you got happy birthday. Press 1 if any of the situations that I just described have been situations that you've been in. A lot of ones. And by the way, like I mentioned earlier, and I want to be clear, I may be positing myself as a little bit of an authority by necessity, by teaching you this, but I'm right here with you. If I were in my own stream, I would be pressing 1 as well. I have made many miscalculations. Many, many, many miscalculations. And if you don't press 1, I'm going to call you a liar. We've all been here. We've all been here. And when you have an opponent that is sufficiently high level, that has their own better reasoned, better developed strategy, your mentality, your spirit will become a factor in it. If I see that you're frustrated, I will play in a way that you find frustrating because that is an opening. That is a weakness. I cannot control somebody. The movements of an individual are completely random, or rather effectively random to an observer. I can never completely predict what you're going to do because you can change your mind. However, if I put pressure on your spirit, if I can scare you, if I can make you angry, if you already came in nervous and I'm not nervous, I could take advantage of your nervousness to create an opening that otherwise would not exist. If you weren't nervous, you might even be able to go toe-to-toe with me. You might even be able to clean my clock. But it doesn't matter. You could be better than me. But if you flinch, you've lost. As Miyamoto Musashi said, if you can make your opponent flinch, you have already won. This is actually a phenomenon that is described as the hidden element of Maai. We have talked about spacing. We have talked about distance. We have talked about timing. We have talked about just about everything related to Maai. But what we haven't talked about is Kokoro no Maai. What is Kokoro no Maai? The interval of the heart, or the interval of the soul. The distance, the spacing of the soul. In other words, Blue Goku, 2M here, will hit you. If I'm right here, I'm always threatening you. But will I 2M? And if I do 2M, will I 2M in time? This is the most common reason I have seen high-level players lose. Because they missed an opportunity. Because they were too preoccupied. They were not sufficiently spirited. Their spirit was either too elevated in emotions like anger, frustration, excitement, nervousness, fear, These are what I would call elevated spirit states or low spirits, depression, anxiety, despondency, lethargy, exhaustion. These things actively slow you down. So even if the 2M will hit here, that doesn't mean your 2M will hit there. And these differences in timing can be the difference between happy birthdaying somebody or somebody happy birthdaying you. Because if they can attack your timing with a timing that you did not anticipate for them to have, you will never win. Even if you have a crazy broken button, or if you're playing Lab Coat or Gogeta Blue or whatever character it is you're afraid of. Kokoro no Maai literally exists in Japanese martial arts to describe the phenomenon that the timing that you will apply is heavily, heavily, heavily influenced by what you are feeling. Your emotions matter, guys. Your emotions matter here. So, what are we going to do about that? Where do we go from here? We're going to be talking about the ideal now. So, what is the ideal mental state with which to go into battle? Now, I'm going to start and preface this by saying, you, you guys don't need to apply this. This is literally just a goalpost. This is what we want to work towards. This is not something that you're going to crack overnight. This is not something you're going to crack in years. We're talking about literal master level shit. I don't even expect Yasha or Wawa to be able to apply this. I don't expect anybody. And the reason why is not because they're not good players, but it's because this art is still very immature. Fighting games have only been around for the last 45 to 50 years, around there, since the very late 70s, early 80s. So about 40 years. Kenjutsu has been around for the last millennia in its current form. Swordsmanship and conflict and warfare and strategies for warfare have been around since the dawn of man all over the world. Every single culture has its own unique approach to warfare. And yet, if you were to read the manuscripts historically between a lot of them, they will all converge on a very, very interesting line. And that line is the ideal mental state. You cannot fight with over-aggression. You cannot fight with anger. I'm going to use a quote from Miyamoto Musashi and repeat it. An elevated spirit is weak. An insufficient spirit is also weak. What he means by this is that when you go into a fight, you must be determined but calm. Resolved but not unencumbered. Or not encumbered. When you hit, it must be decisive. You can't just, and press one if this is you, where you've just been like, oh, I'm just going to throw out random pokes, and then you throw out a 2M, and then you don't convert it, and then your opponent punishes you and you die. You dropped a 2M and you lost the game. Press 1 if that's happened to you. Bonus points if it's happened to you in bracket. Very interesting. Lots of ones. I admire your self-honesty. If you have answered this question, I can definitely see your spirit to improve. And I just want you to know, for everyone that's answering ones right now, I'm very proud of you. Because this takes a lot of courage to admit. So, I'm not going to describe what the mindset is, but I'm going to describe attributes of the mindset. You must be calm and resolute. Just like Bruce Lee said, you must be like water. Water can flow or it can crash. You put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a pot, it becomes the pot. But fun fact, Miyamoto Musashi is actually the one that, surprise, Bruce Lee's quoting. That famous quote from Bruce Lee was actually in the Book of Five Rings. Being like water means that you can adapt to any situation. You don't go in there with a half-cocked strategy that immediately falls apart if your opponent does anything that you don't necessarily expect them to do. What we teach is basically to remain flexible, where if something's not working, you can easily change gears in order to try a different way of approach, a different strategy, or targeting weaknesses that are specific to that encounter. But this is very, very important. Your spirit should never be too high, but it should never be relaxed. You want to be ready, but not tense. You want to be focused, but not so preoccupied that you are unable to think about anything else around you. When you respond, it must be with confidence. When you decide to press a button, you must be doing it with the utmost intention. Do not just throw out a 2M because it's a poke. Do not slash the enemy. When you take up a sword, you must be intent on cutting the enemy. That is from Miyamoto Musashi. What does he mean by that? Obviously, if you pick up a sword, you're going to cut, right? Well, with Miyamoto Musashi, he has a section of the Book of Five Rings that is literally the difference between cutting and slashing. If you cut the opponent, it is not the same thing as slashing. They may look the same to an untrained observer, but a cut is resolved, and it's done with a resolved spirit. It is done with pure focus and intention, and therefore it will strike true. If you're slashing an opponent, even if you do a very hard slash, even if you slash with all of your might and kill them, that is still slashing. It is not a cut. Because essentially what he's saying is it is not enough for you to measure your success through your results. If you're like, oh, it doesn't matter if you're slashing because you killed your opponent. If you kill your opponent regardless, that doesn't necessarily mean that you've grasped the way, which means that you have now given yourself a ceiling. Because that time, your random slashing without intent worked, but the next opponent that you fight that is going to be more skilled than the one that you just felled is going to capitalize on that. When you cut, it must be with intention, and it must be decisive. It must be decisive. Decisive. This is very important to grasp. This is very important to grasp. You need to have your combos down pat. You need to be confident. You need to be ready. You need to confirm that spark. And you can only make decisions like that if you are intent on hitting the enemy. When I pressure, if you guys have fought me and you guys have found me difficult to block, I don't want to, I'm going to use myself as an example. People who have fought me, press 1 if I have staggered you in a way that has absolutely shocked you that I was able to convert into an optimal combo. Like, press 1 if you were like, how the hell did you convert that? There's been so many times that it's no longer surprising. Fair, okay. But the point is, the reason why I'm able to convert my pressure as effectively as I do is not necessarily just because I practiced, but it's because when I pressure, I intend to cut. I pressure with a resolved spirit. And what that means in practical terms is when I pressure you like I've already hit you. I'm not thinking about, oh my God, what button am I going to hit you with? I'm thinking about the oki that I'm about to land after I hit you, or I'm thinking about what to do about the next character after the character that I'm pressuring right now dies. That is what I mean when I say confidence. You need to cut your opponent. Does that mean I'm always correct? No. And if I'm not correct, I don't think of it as, oh no, my plan is ruined. I think, oh, my plan is delayed. I will kill them next time. And focus at the matter at hand. But sooner or later, that character is mine. If I touch that character again, I will open them up and I will hit them. I will confirm and they will die. That is my mentality. That is my spirit when I pressure. And that is the spirit that you need to have whenever you are engaging with something that you cannot control. It's very easy to confirm that when you have a 50-50, but when you're pressuring the way we do, the way you see me do, eventually I will hit you. You need to be intent on cutting the enemy. When you move, you need to move with the intent of cutting the enemy. Don't just move so that way you can play a position. Don't just move so that way you can tap the opponent. Don't just move for this reason or that reason. Move with the intention of winning, with hitting your opponent. Move with that confidence, even if it doesn't work. Keep going. And you must have that resolute, resolved spirit. And that spirit must be able to persevere, which is another quality, perseverance. Meaning, even if you lose, you need to believe that you will be better next time. You will analyze how you lost, and you will make sure that you do not lose that way again. Keep that in mind. If you are able to keep that in mind, and you are able to keep focused, you will eventually overcome your opponent. That's something that you guys really need to be able to cultivate. And honestly, that is the most important thing that we can cultivate in DBFZ. And if you are able to cultivate it in DBFZ, I promise you, you will not only cultivate it here, but you will cultivate it in life. For me, I didn't find that spirit until I played Elden Ring. I was always determined. I was always very confident. I loved photography, but I'm going to get a little bit personal. Earlier in 2022, I retired for 4 months because I went through something in January that really shook the foundations of why I was doing what I was doing. It wasn't until a beautiful person that I met earlier in 2021 that I shot with in 2022. It wasn't until I photographed with her that I began really reevaluating my style, but it took me a lot of courage. I was afraid to go back. I was afraid of my camera. That spirit of perseverance was not something that I understood until I fought Melania, which is why I talk about her so much. I know it's kind of a meme at this point, but I want you to understand that spirit and what it means to me, so that way you understand that I do not issue that lightly. If you are a newbie, if you are a top player, if you are somebody that competes in tournaments but doesn't win, persevere. If nothing else from this stream, cultivate a spirit of perseverance, a spirit and a refusal to be defeated. If you can do that, you will be undefeated. You will eventually become undefeated. That's super, super, super important, guys, for you to deal with. Essentially, ultra instinct. Now, here's what's going to be very important. We're going to do one last thing as we enter the most important thing, and this is where I would expect the most questions. If you are a chatter about Neo Judai, I would appreciate your respect for what I'm trying to do here. But this is going to be very important, guys. We're now going to talk about practical strategies for developing the right attitude. How do we develop a perseverance? How do we hang on to who we are? How do we manage to control our emotions so that way we do not let them overcome us and therefore allow us to overcome other people? The quote that I'm going to issue here, and this is a mantra that I want you to engrave. If you're listening to me and if you're into this, I really want you to engrave this in your heart. Today is your victory over yourself. Tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. Today is your victory over yourself. Tomorrow is your victory over lesser men. Now, I'm going to issue a disclaimer here. These techniques or these strategies that I'm going to mention do not work for everyone. If they do not work for you, that does not necessarily mean you're defective. It doesn't mean that you're doing it wrong. It just means that you need to find what does. The point is that whatever you choose to do, you take in that spirit of self-control. You go in with the intent of self-control and you persevere until you find what works for you. That's what's important. And most importantly, and this is going to be very, very, very heavy. So I'm sorry if you came into this and we're not expecting a very heavy conversation. But when I fight, in my 2.5 years now of doing WTG and training well over 100 people, I have come to the conclusion that a lot of people come in with a lot of baggage. They come in with a lot of weight. They come in with a lot of, sometimes they come up, sometimes their insecurity, sometimes they even come with their trauma. I have sat right next to people where I have just played a first to two with them, and the way I played was so intense that I saw their hands physically shaking. And that's not their fault. You might be like, yo, it's not that deep. It's a video game, but it doesn't matter because what's happening on the screen for them is so emotionally evolved that they were overcome with fear. I've even seen those people overcome their fear. They didn't ever stop being afraid, but they stopped allowing it to control them. They fought back against that fear, and they have such a strong, fiery spirit that they will always have my respect. And I believe that it is capable and possible for you guys to do so as well. But that being said, this is not a substitute for therapy. If you are struggling with something severe, if you are struggling with something legitimate, I'm not your therapist. I'm literally just a random guy on an internet who read a few books and decided to teach you some fighting games. And sometimes the stuff I say makes sense. Sometimes I may yield some insights, but that doesn't matter. If you need somebody to talk to, please consider, if you have the resources and the means to do so, please try to find some therapy, find somebody that can help you, or at the very least, try different forms of therapy that might be recommended for you for what you have. This is not a substitute, and I need to get that disclaimer out of the way. Now, what are some practical strategies that we can apply in order to be better mindful? Number one, it's in that word, mindfulness. Mindfulness is a concept that has been studied for a while. It has existed in Buddhism, but now has found its way into neuroscience. Mindfulness is basically your complete unbroken awareness at a particular action. See, if we were to put it in scientific terms, I'm going to butcher this because I'm not a scientist. I'm just a layman. So if you're a scientist and you have a better way of describing this, please, 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 please correct me. But as far as I understand it, we have two patterns of thought where our brain can either have conscious thought, which basically helps us figure things out and problem solve and actively apply various methods of problem solving in order to, solve complex problems. And then there's another version that basically gives you quick answers to optimize, essentially free up the RAM for you to start solving more complex problems. It's why you would probably, to use Core Gaming's example, it's why you would know that you shouldn't eat a clock, but that orange is edible immediately, but you wouldn't be able to determine which is more edible between a clock and a toaster. They're both inedible. And now we're talking about degrees. That's going to activate that response. And unfortunately, the part of you that thinks is slower. And while the part of you that doesn't think and reacts on instinct is quicker, it is often incorrect. It is very easy to fool it. Mindfulness, however, essentially is where you bring everything to yourself, where you don't impose any value judgments, meaning you don't go, I'm trash, I'm stupid, I'm a piece of shit, like no negative self-talk, but you also don't want to be like, wow, I'm godlike, I'm hype, I'm OD. Don't worry about that. Just pay very close attention without judging yourself at what you're feeling. Pay attention to the way you're feeling and the physical sensations of what you're feeling. If you're angry, you might notice that your muscles are tense. You might notice that your voice is very coarse. You might notice that you're snapping at people a little bit more. You might notice that you're very tense and your words and sentences are short. And you might feel like there's a surge of energy that just makes you want to, ah! You might feel that way. Pay attention to that feeling. Because if you recognize it, as you develop proper recognition of what you're feeling, you will begin to calm down immediately. It's not going to go away, but you are no longer in control. The goal here is not to never get angry. It's not to never get tilted. It's not to become scared or stop being scared or beat yourself up, but it is merely to put yourself back in the driver's seat. Instead of letting your anger and your fear make the decisions, you can look at your fear and say, fear, anger, I know you're there. I can feel your presence within me. I acknowledge your existence. But for right now, I want to make these decisions. You may stay. I'm not going to force you to leave, but you cannot control me. That's the spirit that we need to cultivate. And there are many techniques that you can find online for how to do this. I can share one of mine. I am a practitioner of mindful breathing. What mindful breathing is basically where I sit with my back straight and I inhale. I take a deep breath on the inhale. 1, and then I exhale. 2. I don't try to control my breath. I'm not telling myself to slow down. I'm not telling myself to do this or that. I'm merely observing my breath and counting them. That is how I'm able to get control over my physical sensations. So if I'm angry, if I'm tense, and I notice that that anger is making me react improperly, that's how I gain control over my body. And that's how I'm able to finish what I'm doing, even though I'm tilted. These are techniques that I use at work because work can get very stressful and I work with kids. I can't always get mad. I can't curse and say, fuck you and get mad. I mean, it would be very funny if I said it in front of a 2-year-old, but that's a joke. I can't do that. I have to remain in control. I have to be disciplined, especially in the face of a very belligerent customer. So when I do this, you must be calm. And if you're in control, the anger is still there. It hasn't gone away, but I'm in control of it now. And it will go away naturally when it's ready. The cortisol will burn. Just give it time. And while it is burning through you, do not let it take control. Your mind is very powerful. If you get tilted when losing, that is usually a sign of a lack of confidence. That is a sign of insecurity. Examine that. Now, another thing that's very important is finding a balance of radical self-honesty and not overtaking self-criticism. You need to be able to be vulnerable with yourself. Admitting that I didn't deserve that win. Or admitting I was too tilted. Coming to terms and being honest with yourself is a very valuable way and a very valuable tool, because if you look at yourself, you could start patching those holes. You will make mistakes. Everyone will make mistakes. It will not solve your issue. However, that awareness of what you did wrong is going to be very, very helpful for you, because that awareness is what's going to essentially help you figure out what the correct course of action is, despite the fact that you may have messed up. It's how you take accountability and responsibility for that issue. This is very important. And if you can master this skill, you will not only become a better player, but you will become a more wholesome, well-rounded person. Eventually, once you've practiced mindfulness enough and you understand, you practice the correct technique for you. For me, it's mindful breathing. Sometimes I do a leaves on the stream technique where I take my thoughts and I imagine myself in a stream. It's a cognitive behavioral therapy technique where I imagine myself in front of a stream, and as leaves go by, I take my thoughts and put it on the leaf and just watch them go by. Sometimes I'll do that, but I find mindful breathing to be the thing that helps the most. Also doing kata. If you practice a martial art, if you practice kenjutsu, if I don't have a sword, I'll take a stick, and just doing the motion with my body, with my full intention, grounds me in what I'm feeling. And because of that, I'm able to swing properly. And when I think about the swing, I'm able to course correct, and I'm able to even tell, oh my God, when I notice that I swing, I'm shaking. Because that's another thing that a lot of people will not tell you, or that a lot of people may not necessarily even realize about themselves. If you are stressed, you may not even realize it. If you're under a lot of battle stress, you're under so much cortisol and you're paying attention to so many things that you're not really focusing on how you feel. And you could feel completely fine. There have been times where people are like, dude, why are you so pissed? And I'm like, what do you mean I'm pissed? I'm fucking fine, dog. Like, I feel fine. What the fuck are you talking about? Like, that aggressive. And then, like, I had to take a step back and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't even realize I was that tilted. Like, I didn't realize I was that angry. I didn't even or the opposite. My spirit could be very low, where I feel very depressed, where I'm like, wow, I'm not really feeling this. Like, oh my God, I'm not as excited about this as I want to be. And it's not something that I was really thinking about. I just thought something was wrong with me. These are very important things to keep track of. Awareness and management of your emotions is one of the most powerful tools that you will have in your arsenal, not just at fighting games, but at literally all aspects of life. And if you can apply them within the context of fighting games, you will find that you are incredibly difficult to overcome. What does this begin looking like when you actually play? It means that when you make mistakes, you are now in complete control. So instead of becoming flustered or blundering, you go, shit. Come right back into the game, and you're able to think about the next situation as if the previous one didn't happen, with a very clear, calm, focused, and decisive spirit. Which means that even when you mess up, you're still able to come out on top. And you're still able to overcome your opponent, because that opening that your opponent just got doesn't lead a larger opening or give them ability to exploit your emotions to create openings that would not otherwise be there. You become resistant to that, which means that your opponent needs to now find a different strategy. Awareness is your most powerful tool. But what's also very important that I want to caution you guys against, the last two things I will leave you, or the last three things that we need, is self-compassion. Some of you guys are way too hard on yourselves. And being too hard on yourself is actually the result of arrogance. If I see somebody that's like, yo, I'm OD, I'm gonna beat everybody, I'm gonna kick your ass, blah, 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 blah. If I see somebody like that intense, what that tells me is that they are not very honest with themselves, and they are not very compassionate to themselves, because they don't have a solid understanding or appreciation of themselves. They're just seeing what they are. And if they think that they're OD, that means it's going to make them OD. And if other people see them as OD, they feel validated. But the moment shit crashes, they're not able to bounce back from it. They collapse and fold like a house of cards. I have seen this happen with almost every single top player I've seen that is notoriously cocky. They get clapped and they just fold. They lose and it's nothing but excuses. But that's why. It's not because they're an asshole. It's very easy for us to be dismissive and be like, oh, you're a jerk, you're a terrible person, blah, 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 blah. But in reality, it's because they're not very compassionate to themselves. They never sat down and was like, maybe I'm not very good, but that's okay. I can get better. They're always, whenever I see arrogance, it's always accompanied as a result of negative self-talk. Oh my God, I should have teched that, bro. Oh my God, I'm such a piece of shit. Why am I reacting? Why am I playing like shit? Why do I suck at this fucking game? Press 1 if that kind of like talk is something that you routinely do to yourself. Let's see some radical honesty in the chat. Press 1 if you're the kind of person that has a lot of negative self-talk whenever things don't go your way. Because I guarantee you, if you're tilted while losing, that's probably a very big part of your internal network. Once again, I want to thank everybody who's posting ones in the chat, because you guys are brave. You guys are super, super, super brave. Thank you so much for being so vulnerable with me in this public stream. It's hard sometimes. I agree, it's hard. Which is why it's not enough to just look objectively at yourself. You have to be compassionate. That's non-negotiable. Now, let me ask you this. What would you guys say to me if you heard me talking the way you talk to yourself to another person? Your friend, maybe. Like, what if I went to Blake and I was like, bro, you suck. You're a piece of shit. Why can't you take this fucking DR? Blah, 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 blah. Like, what would you do if you saw me with the negative critical talk that you guys issue to yourselves to another person? You would think I'm the worst person in the world. You'd be like, why are you attacking this person? Dude, it's not that deep. But why do you allow those attacks from yourself against yourself? You don't deserve that. You don't deserve that negative self-talk. Being mindful and aware of that pattern will help you change it. Instead of saying, man, why can't I take the DR? I'm so stupid. Why can't I react? Think of practical solutions. Being like, all right, I'm definitely not reacting to DR. And there's clearly a reason for that. What's going on here? And let me see if I can figure this out. And being honest. And maybe you could literally be like, oh shit, I didn't even realize I didn't have breakfast this morning and I'm fucking starving. Or, oh my God, I'm really tired. Or, oh my gosh, I just had a long day of work and like the screen is blurry to me right now. Like I just can't seem to focus. Or you could be like, all right, I think what's happening is that I'm reacting incorrectly. What if I try to do it a little bit quicker? What if I try to anticipate it? These are solutions that may or may not work in the moment, but they are miles ahead, way more helpful than your incredibly toxic self-criticism. You don't want to be toxic to yourself. Show some compassion. And by the way, a lot of people would be like, wait, aren't you making excuses? Making excuses is not the same thing as understanding a situation. An excuse is when you're running from a situation and using what you're feeling to cover up something that you could do but refuse to take responsibility for. It is not the same thing as identifying a potential explanation for what's going on. And I feel like this comes, to get a little bit deep, I feel like this comes from a whole generation of parents that didn't believe you when you had a headache and couldn't focus in school, and then you didn't do your homework or you fucked up on a test, and then they were like, why did you fail this? Oh man, I'm sorry, I had a headache that day. That's not an excuse. Yes, it is. It's not an excuse. It's a reason why you failed. You studied for the test, you did the work, but you were literally impaired physically because of a physical phenomenon that was actually preventing you from concentrating at your fullest. The issue that they're criticizing and the reason for this basically becomes a or the expectation that this creates is that this creates an unreasonable expectation that you need to perform at your top best when you're at your lowest. If you're tired, if you're hungry, if you're exhausted, if you didn't sleep well, if you're jet lagged, it doesn't matter. You should be winning top 8. And if you don't win top 8, you're trash. But how can you effectively do that when the odds are against you? Now you might be like, well, isn't it more impressive to win top 8 if you have all of those things working against you on top of a stacked bracket? No. And I think one of the biggest issues with the FGC is that we tend to idolize this. Like, oh my God, this person didn't sleep for literally 24 hours before winning a tournament. Who gives a shit about the tournament, dog? Are you okay? Like, why are we praising you for winning a tournament? You did something so incredibly unhealthy. Eat something. Go to sleep. Take a nap. Take care of yourself. We prioritize winning and we prioritize results over our own well-being, almost to the point where that is all that matters and we neglect our well-being. You cannot cultivate a proper spirit that is able to endure, that is healthy, that is able to engage with this game healthily if you do not take care of yourself. If you want to win at a tournament, you might, like, if you were to ask me, Ken, how do I win the next tournament? Very simple. Sleep. Eat. Practice. And relax. If you go into that tournament with sharp focus, if you go into that tournament with a proper settled spirit, there's nothing that's going to stand in your way. But if you're hungry, you're going to be more susceptible to being annoyed and angry. You're going to be in a hurry because you're going to be wondering when dinner's ready in the next match, or, oh my God, when is the next time I'm going to be eat? You're going to start becoming distracted. Little thoughts are going to break into your mind and they're going to shatter your focus. And even if your minimum is enough to beat everyone around you, eventually it will bite you in the ass because you will lose to the most important opponent, yourself. Because yeah, cool, you could win a tournament or you won a top 8 because you didn't sleep for 24 hours. That's great. Are you going to beat that mental breakdown that comes afterwards? Because you're not going to be able to enjoy that win as much as possible. You probably are not even going to be able to care. You're too tired. What's the point of winning a tournament if you're not even going to be in a position where you can fully enjoy the benefits of it? Sure, you get the accolades and you could say and put in your bio, oh, top 8 at CEO or whatever. But who cares? Nobody cares. Nobody cares about majors and competition except other people that are trying to enter that competition. It is not worth it if you are not taking care of yourself. And it is definitely not worth it if the way you train is lacking in self compassion. Use this as a cautionary tale. I'm going to be completely honest. I'm going to be completely upfront. WTG crashed and burned. Why? Because I was not taking care of myself. I was so overwhelmed during Fighters Kingdom. I was literally having a mental breakdown. I was lashing out at the people closest to me who were just trying to help me. That is not a place that you want to be. It will cost you friends. Yeah, sure. I made a lot of money in that time. I was financially very stable, but what was the point if I could not even enjoy the thing that I was trying to earn the money to do? Fighters Kingdom was supposed to be my baby, and I hated it. It made me hate Fighters Kingdom. It made me hate my friends. I still dislike some of them. It created such an ugly, toxic situation. It poisoned me. It inflicted me with scarlet rot. And that was literally because I was not taking care of myself. I did not say no because I was too focused. I bit off way more than I can chew. The skill level of the people that were trying to assist me was very low, and they were not able to help me with what I needed to do. And I became very quickly overwhelmed. And I became very, very, very quickly overwhelmed. And that overwhelm made me susceptible. So at the same time, I won, but at what cost? Seriously, at what cost? It is not worth it. And the only antidote for me being like that in that constant spiral of despair was Elden Ring. No, I'm kidding. It's self compassion. Being able to understand yourself, being patient with yourself, talking to yourself as if you were an old friend. That right there is the most important mentality to cultivate. Because if you can cultivate a spirit of self compassion, you will improve much quicker. People don't improve under fear and anxiety. They improve despite of it. That progress that, like, if you look at Whiplash and you see the kid being abused by the teacher and whatnot, and like the movie almost flirts with the idea, it's like, yeah, that kind of intensity is necessary because it pushes them. No, he likely would have gotten that good, if not better, without all of the stress and fear. Because the thing that makes a great artist is not the shit that they endure. They grow despite it. The thing that makes them go is by cultivating a spirit of perseverance that is born through the love of what they're doing. And if you're a good teacher and you can cultivate that passion, you will make that student reach a way higher level than any of the abusive tactics that you can employ on them. Do not do not become preoccupied. Do not be that teacher in Whiplash to yourself. Cultivate that spirit of self-compassion. Be kind to yourself, be patient to yourself, understand why something's not working. And when you understand why something's not working, an excuse is when you use it as an excuse is when you use a reason to not fix it. Identifying a problem and fixing it is just troubleshooting. Oh my God, I can't tech DR when I'm tired. That's a very easy solution. Go to sleep and don't play Dragon Ball unless you're precisely awake. If you are in a tournament and you need a pinch, go drink some caffeine. Wake up. Take a nap. Don't say, oh, I can't do this because I'm tired, and then just never work on teching DR. Go rest. Listen to your body. And it's the same thing in practice. When you practice, cultivate that attitude, that spirit of determination, that spirit of perseverance, and that settled spirit where you are able to decisively attack your opponent. So that way you know the game so well that when you actually hit your opponent, you are prepared. Learn to cut your opponent and use your awareness as a check against yourself. And the final thing that we will talk about is empathy. There is an astounding lack of empathy that I see in the FGC that I do not like. It is one of the reasons why I personally do not want to engage with the broader FGC. And while I teach DBFZ, a lot of people are confused when I don't want to compete. They're like, how do you not want to compete? Why would I? For what? Because even if I win, I would have had to have endured so many really awful people and so many toxic egos. It's not worth it. That doesn't bring me joy. A victory wouldn't bring me joy. Helping people does. And that help, that desire to help people, the reason I'm still here is empathy. Because I know what it's like to struggle to get better at something. And I want to help you guys get better at things because you guys help me get better at things. We learn. I benefit just as much from teaching you guys as you do from me, if not more so. And I don't just mean that financially. I get genuine fulfillment out of teaching some of you. I will never forget this. I've told this story on chats before, but I don't think I've ever mentioned it live. I'm not going to say names, but I went to a major tournament once. And I saw two people compete in top 8. They were competing to go to grand finals. It was losers finals. Now, these two people are friends. When one of them won, I saw them pop off and get carried off by the crowd. And I saw my friend double over, trying hard not to cry in front of a crowd of 100 people, and no one gave a shit. Everyone just looks at him and is like, oh, shit, emotion. I'm just going to give him a minute. And they just ignored him. I will never forget that. I will never forget that. Understand that if you are competing in Dragon Ball, if you have aspirations to compete, if you're even playing this game, you are a remarkably privileged person. It may not feel that way, but you are privileged enough to have a PC or a console that you can play this game on, privileged enough to be part of a community that you can afford to be a part of, privileged enough to find people to play with, and privileged enough to have the time to be able to improve at it. Empathy is important because when you understand what someone's going through, you will understand yourself. The last quote from Miyamoto Musashi: it is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others. We are herd, we are pack mentality, we are social creatures. We understand ourselves best through comparison and contrast with other people. That's what makes fiction so exciting to read. Seeing two personalities and two people clash because they are so diametrically opposed, yet so similar. It's what makes Batman versus the Joker so incredible. It's what made Goku versus Frieza so fun to watch. It's the backbone of half of the anime that you guys watch and enjoy. You must understand others to understand yourself. And you must understand yourself to understand others. It is a two-way street. Don't forget that your opponents are human beings. So if you beat them in bracket, pop off. You earned that victory. Be proud of your win. But don't neglect to take care of your friend. That person who fought you wanted to win just as badly, if not more so than you did. Having respect for your opponent, rather than styling on them, rather than going on Twitter, rather than going and calling the bracket free, blah, 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 blah. Show respect to the people who helped you get to where you were, and honor the people who had the courage to stand in front of you, because if you've ever competed, you know how fucking scary that is. And it never gets easier. Not even for Wawa. Not even for Yasha. It never gets easier. They get used to it. That's the difference. But it doesn't get easier. They are just as nervous. And I think that is basically the basis of strategy. Because once you understand yourself and you understand your opponent, that is when you are able to capitalize on when their spirit changes. You will notice when they become a little bit scared of you. And once you notice these changes, it will help you refine your strategies. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it for tonight. Even though it's a very short class, I wanted to keep this class very, very tight and very concise, so that way it's easy for you guys to rewatch if necessary. All right. With that, if you guys have no other questions, I will now take my leave. But thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. And thank you guys for, as always, for being part of our community. If you want to get access to the Discord where you can hang out with me and other people that you see on the stream, make sure that you guys go ahead and subscribe on Twitch. If you're listening on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very, very, very happy to do this class for you. And if you're interested in supporting us, consider following us or finding us on Twitch. And consider subscribing if you're interested in taking lessons and taking your skills to the next level. If you want to support the stream, the best way to do that is through donations. Any amount helps us, guys, as this is a part of my income and I want to be able to do this more often. So if possible, guys, if you're feeling generous at all, please throw a small donation if you can, as any amount that you give will help the stream. Thank you so much, and I hope the rest of you have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful rest of your evening. Good night, my friends.